I kept my son in the dark about one thing. My monthly income is $62,000. When he invited me to the grand opening of his wife's luxury boutique, I decided to go, not as the woman I really am, but as the poor widow they already believed me to be. I wanted to see with my own eyes how they treat someone they think has nothing. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The looks, the quick up and down glances, the quiet judgment that people learn to hide behind expensive smiles. A few minutes later, I heard my daughter-in-law murmur to someone nearby, "That old lady should be ashamed to wear such depressing clothes." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said one sentence that would change the rest of that night. "I'm glad to have you here. Stay with my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far it reaches. My name is Marianne, and at 71 years old, I thought I understood human nature. I was wrong. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored cardstock, embossed, gold-lettered, the kind of paper that probably costs more than many people spend on groceries in a week. "You are cordially invited to the grand opening of Luxe Boutique," it read, written in elegant script. Beneath it, in smaller print, "Brixton Whitmore Hayes presents an exclusive collection." My daughter-in-law's name sat there like a dare, and that familiar tight knot formed in my stomach. Brixton, the woman who had carefully pushed me out of my son's life for the past 3 years. The woman who answered Damon's phone when I called and told me he was too busy. The woman who turned family dinners into polite interrogations about my finances, always smiling sweetly, yet never quite warm. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter beside a stack of investment reports that showed my monthly income clearly, $62,000. Damon had no idea. That money didn't appear overnight. I built it slowly after my husband died, painfully, patiently, investment by investment, penny by penny. And I did it while living quietly in the same small home where I raised my son, the same home Damon used to visit every Sunday, back before Brixton. Now those visits had shrunk into stiff holiday appearances. Brixton would compliment my charming little house with the kind of tone that wasn't really a compliment at all. Damon would avoid my eyes, as if my simple life embarrassed him. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the invitation over and over. Why invite me now? Brixton usually found a reason to keep me out of their events. "It's more of a professional gathering," or "We figured you'd be more comfortable at home." And then it hit me. They needed bodies. A grand opening needed guests, photos, smiling faces, full chairs, and even an awkward mother-in-law was better than an empty room. That's when the idea arrived. Slowly, like morning light pushing through heavy clouds. What if I didn't go as Marianne Hayes, the woman who could buy the entire boutique without blinking? What if I went as the poor widow they already assumed I was? What if I finally tested them, watched them closely when they believed no one important was paying attention? For the next 2 days, I prepared. I passed over the designer pieces I saved for special occasions. I ignored the elegant outfits that still fit perfectly. I went deeper into the closet until I found a dusty box in the back. Inside was what I needed. An old cardigan my sister gave me years ago, faded, slightly worn, and pilled at the sleeves. A skirt I wore to church in the 1980s, clean but unmistakably dated. Sensible shoes with scuffed heels. When I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly what I wanted to see. An elderly woman of modest means, trying her best but obviously out of place. The boutique sat in the upscale Meridian district, where even the parking meters feel like an insult. I circled the block twice before finding a spot 3 blocks away, weaving between gleaming BMWs and Mercedes that cost more than most people's homes. As I walked toward the storefront, I could see the event through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Champagne flutes lifted and clinked, designer dresses shimmered under bright lights. Men in tailored suits studied price tags with the relaxed indifference of people who don't have to check their bank accounts first. The entrance was heavy glass and polished chrome, built to whisper one message: "You don't belong here unless we decide you do." A young woman in a black dress greeted me with a practiced smile, but it slipped the moment her eyes landed on my outfit. "Good evening," she said, her voice shifting from friendly to politely uncertain. "Are you here for the opening?" "Yes," I answered gently. "My daughter-in-law invited me." She looked down at her tablet, scrolling like she expected my name not to exist in her world. "And you are—" "Marianne Hayes." Her finger stopped. I watched her expression change the instant she found it. Relief mixed with something else. Pity, maybe. "Of course," she said quickly. "Please come in. There's champagne and hors d'oeuvres." Inside, the brightness hit me like a spotlight. Everything was white and chrome and blindingly clean. Clothes hung like museum pieces, each one isolated, perfectly spaced, and lit like it was priceless art. Price tags dangled like accusations. $800 for a simple blouse, $1,500 for a handbag that looked like it could hold nothing but a wallet and keys. I moved slowly, painfully aware of how I looked among those people. Women with perfect hair and flawless makeup glanced my way, eyes sliding over my cardigan and skirt, then turned away with barely hidden disgust, returning to their conversations as if I were background noise. That's when I saw Damon. My son stood near the back of the store, laughing at something a tall man in an expensive suit had said. In his navy blazer, hair perfectly styled, he looked polished, successful, like he belonged here. For a second, my heart warmed with pride. Then our eyes met. His face shifted from surprise to something colder, something tight. Embarrassment. He glanced around quickly, as if checking who might have noticed him recognizing the elderly woman in the faded cardigan. "Mom," he said when I approached, his voice carefully flat. "I didn't think you were coming." "The invitation said the whole family was welcome," I replied, studying him. "I assumed that included me." "Of course it does," he said. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let me find Brixton," he added quickly. "She'll want to say hello." He didn't offer me a drink. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't even touch my arm the way he used to when he was younger. He simply slipped away into the crowd, leaving me standing alone among strangers, like an inconvenience he needed to manage, not a mother he missed. I drifted toward a display of scarves, each one priced higher than what I used to spend on Damon's entire school wardrobe. And I waited, because I knew Brixton would come. And when she did, I would finally see exactly who she was when she thought she was safe. The silk really was beautiful, I'll give it that. But $800 for a scarf? My mind immediately went to the women I know from church, working 2 jobs, counting every dollar, stretching money until it practically begs for mercy. As I stood there, I noticed a woman around my age studying a pearl necklace. She looked elegant, but her eyes were warm, kind in a way that felt rare in that room. "I couldn't help noticing you looking at the scarves," she said with a gentle smile. "They're lovely, aren't they?" "They are," I admitted. "Just a little beyond my budget." She laughed, an honest laugh that cut through the fake chatter around us. "Mine too, I'm afraid. I'm Eleanor Hartwell. I'm here with my daughter. And if I'm being truthful, I feel like a fish out of water." I nodded, surprised by the sudden comfort of her presence. "Marianne Hayes," I said. "I know exactly what you mean." We spoke for a few minutes, and I found myself genuinely enjoying her. She was sharp, funny, and carried a self-deprecating humor that reminded me of the friends I used to have before life got complicated. Then I heard my name. "Marianne." I turned, and there was Brixton. She was radiant in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than some people's cars. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like she belonged on a glossy magazine cover, not in the real world. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, using a tone that somehow managed to imply the opposite. Her eyes flicked over my outfit, and I watched her struggle to keep her smile from slipping. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied evenly. "The store is lovely." Her face brightened as she launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech, her vision, her aesthetic, her carefully curated collection. I nodded at the right moments, but I was watching her closely. Even as she spoke to me, her eyes kept darting past me, searching for more important people. "I hope you'll find something that speaks to you," she finished, though her voice suggested she doubted anything here would ever speak to someone like me. That's when it happened. I was looking at a simple black dress, plain, basic, and priced at $2,000, when I heard Brixton's voice rise across the boutique. "I honestly don't know why some people even come to events like this," she said, her words dripping with irritation, "when they clearly can't afford anything." My hand froze on the fabric. "I mean, look at that old woman over there," Brixton continued, dropping her voice to what she probably believed was a whisper. "Damon's mother. She shows up in that depressing outfit, touching everything with her grubby fingers. It's embarrassing." My heart stopped. I scanned the room and realized she was talking about me. A small circle of perfectly dressed women stood with her, nodding like they were listening to something obvious. "Some people have no shame," one of them said. "Coming to a place like this when they don't belong," another added. "Exactly," Brixton agreed, gaining momentum now that she had an audience. "We invited her out of politeness, but honestly, she should have declined. Old pauper. She should be ashamed to wear those depressing clothes to an event like this." The words hit like blunt force. Old pauper. Depressing clothes. Should be ashamed. I stood there surrounded by luxury I could afford 10 times over, listening to my own daughter-in-law humiliate me to strangers, mocking me while wearing jewelry I could have bought without blinking. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Slowly, I turned and met Brixton's eyes across the room. She'd been so absorbed in her cruelty that she hadn't realized I heard every word. When she saw me looking at her, her face drained of color. But only for a second. Then she pasted on that familiar, practiced smile. I started walking toward her. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady. The women around her scattered instantly, like leaves caught in a gust of wind, suddenly fascinated by handbags and hangers and anything that wasn't the tension in the air. "Brixton," I said, calm and clear. "What a lovely event." "Marianne," she stammered, clearly trying to calculate how much damage had just been done. "I was just telling everyone how happy we are that you could join us." I smiled, this time a real smile, because in that moment I learned everything I needed to know about the woman my son married, and she still had no idea what was coming. "That's very kind of you, dear," I said softly. "But I think you should know something about appearances." She blinked, confused. "Sometimes," I continued, lowering my voice just enough to make her lean in, "the people who look like they have the least are the ones who control the most." I watched her brow tighten as she tried to understand what I meant. Then I simply smiled, patted her arm with gentle familiarity, and walked away, leaving her standing there in a slow-growing fog of confusion. As I moved toward the exit, I caught my reflection in one of the boutique mirrors. I looked exactly as I'd planned, an elderly woman of modest means, slightly out of place, but dignified. What Brixton didn't know, what none of them knew, was that tomorrow morning I would wake up in my modest little house and check the investment portfolio that could purchase that entire building. They didn't know that beneath my faded cardigan lived the heart of a woman who spent decades learning how cruel people can be to those they believe are beneath them. They didn't know their worst nightmare had just walked out the door wearing sensible shoes and a gentle smile. But they would, soon enough. I drove home through streets that blurred into memory, past landmarks from Damon's childhood, the ice cream shop where we celebrated his first good report card, the park where I taught him to ride a bike after working a double shift, the library where we spent Saturday mornings because it was free, warm, and full of stories that could take us anywhere, places where Damon used to grin the moment he saw me. My house sat at the end of Maple Street exactly as it had for 32 years, white clapboard siding, blue shutters, a small front porch where I once rocked him as a baby. Other houses nearby had grown and modernized over the years, expanded and renovated. Mine stayed the same, by choice. Let them assume I couldn't afford more. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the darkness for a moment, replaying Brixton's words. Old pauper? The phrase echoed in my head, each repetition feeding a fire that had been quietly burning for 3 years. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sank into my father's old recliner. The house was silent except for the steady ticking of the mantel clock, a wedding gift from my late husband, Robert, the same clock that had measured our life together for 41 years. I reached for the photo album on the side table. Its leather cover had been worn smooth from years of handling. The first picture showed Damon at 3 months old, asleep in my arms. I remembered that day perfectly. Robert had just left for another business trip, and I was alone with a colicky baby, unpaid bills, and a stomach full of worry. And yet, I was happy then, exhausted, overwhelmed, scared, but happy. I turned the pages slowly and watched my son grow from a chubby-cheeked toddler into a serious little boy, and then into a young man I barely recognized anymore. There he was at 6, missing his front teeth, grinning as he held up a crayon drawing of our family. At 10, proud in his little league uniform, the one I'd bought secondhand and prayed nobody would notice. At 15, awkward and lanky, standing beside me at his graduation like he wasn't sure what to do with his arms. I paused at a photo from his college graduation. Damon stood between Robert and me, his arm around my shoulders, his face bright with possibility. That was before Robert died. Before I discovered what I was truly capable of, before I realized I had a gift for turning small investments into serious returns, before I became wealthy and decided to hide it. The phone rang and snapped me out of the past. I glanced at the clock. 11:15 p.m. Only one person called that late. "Hello, Damon," I answered, recognizing him before he even spoke. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, "I wanted to apologize for tonight. Brixton feels terrible about the way things went." I almost laughed. Terrible. Not sorry. Not ashamed. Terrible. Like her cruelty was something that happened to her, not something she chose to do to me. "Does she?" I asked calmly. "She didn't mean anything by what she said," he rushed in. "You know how she gets at these events, the pressure to make everything perfect." "Ah," I said softly, "so the pressure made her call me an old pauper." A silence opened between us, wide and heavy. Finally, Damon exhaled. "You heard that?" I did. "Mom, you have to understand," he said quickly. "This boutique means everything to her. She's worked so hard, and with the economy the way it is, retail is tough. She's just stressed." I listened to my son defend the indefensible, and something inside my chest cracked. Quietly. Painfully. When had he become this man? When had he learned to excuse cruelty as stress? "Damon," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "Do you remember when you were 8, and Tommy Morrison called me a poor old bag because my car was older than his mother's?" He hesitated. "Mom, you punched him in the nose. Do you remember that?" I asked. "You came home with a black eye and a note from your teacher, but you were proud. You told me nobody was allowed to talk about your mom like that." The silence on the other end was deafening. "What happened to that boy?" I asked quietly. "I grew up," he said at last. "I learned not everything is worth fighting over." "I see," I replied, "and your mother's dignity isn't worth fighting for." "Mom, that's not fair." Another pause, then his voice changed. Careful, rehearsed. "Look, Brixton and I have been talking. We think it might be better if you didn't come to these kinds of events anymore." He rushed to soften it. "Not because we don't want you there, it's just, you seem uncomfortable. And honestly, some of these people can be judgmental about appearances." There it was. The real message, finally said out loud. "Don't come because you embarrass us." "I understand perfectly," I said. "Good," he replied with relief. "I knew you would. You've always been reasonable." Reasonable. The word my father used whenever he wanted me to accept less than I deserved, the word Robert used when he left me alone with a sick baby and a mountain of bills, the word people had thrown at me my entire life when they wanted me to shrink to fit their convenience. "Yes," I said softly, I've always been reasonable. After I hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time. Then I walked into my home office, the small room that used to be Damon's bedroom. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, each drawer packed with the paper trail of my financial life, every investment, every dividend, every risk I calculated and took with steady hands. I opened my laptop and logged into my banking app. The numbers lit up on the screen like a secret weapon. $738,000 in checking, $2.3 million across investment portfolios, another $800,000 in real estate holdings that no one knew I owned. All of it built over the past 15 years, since Robert's insurance money gave me the first real stake to invest. I'd been careful, methodical. I started small, buying into companies I understood, researching until my eyes burned. I reinvested every profit, living quietly off Social Security and Robert's pension while the portfolio grew. And I told no one. Not my neighbors, who thought I was just a sweet old widow surviving on a fixed income. Not my doctor, who still offered payment plans for routine procedures. Not the women at church who sometimes slipped $20 bills into my purse when they thought I wasn't looking. And certainly not Damon. At first, I stayed quiet because I needed to be sure it was real. Money can vanish as fast as it arrives, and I'd learned never to trust something until it was solid. Then I stayed quiet for another reason. I wanted to know who my son truly was. Would he visit his mother because he loved her, or because he expected something from her someday? Tonight, I got my answer. My phone buzzed with a text. From Damon. By the way, Brixton's having some trouble with the boutique finances. Rent is higher than expected and sales are slow. If you happen to know anyone who might be interested in investing. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back. I'm afraid I don't know any investors. You know how it is with people like me. People like me? Poor people. Invisible people. People who didn't matter. I hit send. A reply came almost immediately. Right. Of course, just thought I'd ask. Love you. Love you. 3 words that once warmed me. Now they felt empty. More habit than feeling, spoken out of duty rather than affection. I closed the laptop and walked into the kitchen, where I had left the boutique's business card on the counter. Luxe Boutique, it read in elegant gold script. Beneath it was an address I knew very well, because I owned the building. Not directly, of course. I wasn't foolish enough to put my name on anything that obvious, but through a web of LLCs and investment partnerships, I controlled a significant amount of real estate in the Meridian district, including the building where my daughter-in-law had just opened her dream boutique, the same building where she stood insulting me as an old pauper, completely unaware that her words echoed off my walls. I thought about the lease Brixton had signed, the one that contained a tidy little clause allowing the landlord to terminate the agreement with 30 days' notice if the tenant engaged in behavior harmful to the property's reputation. I remembered the security cameras in the building's common areas. I remembered Damon's text begging for investors while simultaneously asking me not to attend events because I embarrassed them, and I smiled. Over the next few days, I made a few discreet calls. Very discreet. To people who owed me favors, people who knew how to gather information quietly and report back without exposing the source of their curiosity. What I learned was enlightening. Brixton had maxed out 3 credit cards to fund the boutique's opening. She had borrowed against Damon's car and taken out a second mortgage on their home. The shop's expenses were nearly double what she predicted, and sales were coming in at less than 40% of her optimistic projections. They weren't just struggling, they were spiraling. And then came the most interesting piece of information. According to one of my contacts at the bank, Damon had recently inquired about a loan and tried to use his future inheritance as collateral. He told the loan officer his elderly mother was in poor health and that her modest estate would likely pass to him in the next few years. He was counting on my death to solve their financial disaster. My son had written me off, in every sense of the word. That night, I sat in my recliner with my tea and the photo album resting on my lap, but I wasn't reminiscing anymore. I was planning. I thought about the inheritance Damon believed existed, one built on assumptions about his poor mother who must, surely, have socked away a little something over the years. He had no idea that his poor mother owned enough real estate to make him a wealthy man overnight. He had no idea that I had already made very specific plans for my wealth, and he had no idea that those plans no longer included him. Tomorrow, I would begin teaching my son and his wife what it truly means to underestimate an old woman. Tonight, I would let myself remember the little boy who once punched a bully for mocking his mother. That boy was gone, but the woman he loved so fiercely, she was still here, and she was done being reasonable. Monday arrived gray and damp, the kind of morning that perfectly matched my mood. I stood at the kitchen window, sipping coffee, watching raindrops slide down the glass as I mapped out my next steps. The phone rang at exactly 9:30 a.m., right on schedule. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Jennifer Morrison from Morrison Property Management. I'm calling about the Meridian District building you own through Hartwell Holdings, LLC." I'd been expecting her call since Friday. Jennifer was my property manager, a sharp, efficient young woman who handled my buildings without knowing the identity of the true owner. As far as she knew, I was simply the representative for a group of anonymous investors. "Good morning, Jennifer. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to update you on the new tenant in Unit 12A, Luxe Boutique. They've already missed their first quarterly maintenance fee, and to be honest, their business behavior is concerning some of the other tenants." I sat down slowly, though none of this surprised me. "What kind of concerns?" "Well," Jennifer hesitated, "there was an incident at their grand opening. Several witnesses reported the owner making disparaging comments about customers. Very unprofessional, the sort of thing that could damage the building's reputation." "I see," I said softly. "What exactly was said?" She cleared her throat. "According to multiple witnesses, the owner called an elderly customer an old pauper and suggested she didn't belong there. Apparently it happened in front of a room full of potential clients. Even hearing the words second-hand stung." "That is concerning," I agreed. "Have there been any other issues?" "The tenant has been asking other business owners about investors. They seem to be experiencing cash flow problems. And honestly, Mrs. Hayes, their lease application was borderline. We only approved it because we wanted that unit filled." "I understand. Please send me a full report, including witness statements." "Of course. Should I schedule a building inspection? We could cite any violations." "Not yet," I said. "Let me review everything first. And, Jennifer, keep this confidential. I prefer quiet resolutions." "Understood. I'll have the report ready by this afternoon." When I hung up, I sat in the stillness of my kitchen, feeling the pieces of my plan slide neatly into position. Brixton had no idea her behavior had been witnessed. She had no idea those witnesses reported her. She had no idea that the management they reported to me. For the rest of the morning, I reviewed financial documents. What I found made their situation look even worse. They owed nearly $40,000 in credit card debt. They were behind on their mortgage. They had a massive balloon payment due on their business loan in 6 months. The boutique wasn't simply struggling, it was sinking. At noon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Damon. "Mom, is everything okay?" His voice was tense, distracted. "I'm fine," I said gently. "I was wondering if you might have time for lunch today. It's been so long since we've talked." He paused. I could almost hear him weighing the inconvenience of his mother's emotions. "Today's not great," he said. "Brixton's having issues with the store. I'm trying to help." "Financial issues," I said. The silence was instantaneous. "How did you—" "Never mind. Yes, some cash flow problems, but nothing we can't fix." "Of course not," I said softly. "You've always been capable, just like your father." "Thanks, Mom. Look, can I call you later? I really need to get back to this." "Certainly, but Damon, if there's anything I can do to help—" He laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "Unless you've got $50,000 lying around, Mom, I think we're on our own." $50,000. The exact amount they needed to stay afloat. "I wish I could help," I said. And for the first time, he had no idea just how true that was. "I would help if I could," I said. "You know that." "I know, Mom. You've always done your best with what you had." What I had. If only he knew. That afternoon, I drove to the Meridian District, not to the boutique. I had no intention of walking back into Brixton's poison-filled world. Instead, I took the elevator to the top floor, to Sterling & Associates, the law firm that managed my real estate deals and my future. Margaret Sterling had been my attorney for 5 years, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair, thoughtful eyes, and the calm confidence of someone who'd watched more than a few families destroy themselves over money. She was one of the very few people who knew the truth about my finances. "Mary Ann," she said warmly, rising from behind her mahogany desk. "What a lovely surprise. What can I do for you?" I sat down, opened my purse, and pulled out the business card from Luxe Boutique. "I need you to look into this business," I said. Margaret studied the card, one brow lifting. "This is in your building. 4th floor, isn't it?" "It is," I replied. "And the owner is my daughter-in-law." Understanding flickered in her eyes. She'd seen enough to recognize the storm clouds gathering over family ties. "What exactly are you looking for?" she asked. "Everything," I answered. "Their financial situation, lease terms, business registration. I want to know every detail about how they're operating." "Mary Ann," she said gently, "if this is about family, it's about business," I cut in, my tone firm. "They're in financial trouble, and before I make any decisions as their landlord, I need to know just how deep they're drowning." Margaret nodded slowly. "I'll have a full report ready for you by tomorrow afternoon. But may I ask what brought this on?" I thought of Brixton's voice calling me an old pauper, of Damon's easy excuses for her cruelty, of the way they had slowly pushed me to the edges of their lives, treating me as a burden to be handled rather than someone to be cherished. "Let's just say I've learned some uncomfortable truths about my family," I said at last. "And I'd like all the facts before I decide what to do next." That evening, I sat in my office, sifting through old paper ghosts, letters, notes, birthday cards Damon had written to me over the years. Generic messages, obligatory thanks, short, polite paragraphs that could have been written to anyone. I even pulled out his wedding invitation. "Mrs. Robert Hayes," it read where my name should have been, not mother of the groom, just an extension of my husband's identity, even years after his death. I'd told myself at the time it was just a wording choice, space constraints, nothing personal. Now I saw it as part of a pattern, not a single cutting blow but a slow erasure, reducing me to a background character in my own son's story. At 8 o'clock, the phone rang again. "Damon." "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about wanting to help." My heart lifted for a moment. Maybe there was still hope. Maybe he had remembered that family meant more than money. "Yes?" I said. "Well, you know how you always said that modest house of yours would be worth something someday once the neighborhood turned around?" I knew exactly where this was going. I let him continue. "Have you ever thought about getting it appraised? You could probably get a good price if you sold it, maybe enough to rent a nice apartment in a senior community." "A senior community," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yeah, somewhere with activities, people your age. You'd probably love it. And if the house sold for enough, you could help Brixton and me get back on our feet, like a family investment." There it was, the real purpose of the call. "I see," I said slowly. "So you'd like me to sell my home, the home where I raised you, where your father and I lived together for 41 years, to finance your wife's failing business." "It's not failing," he protested. And I just thought, "And then I would move into some institution," I continued calmly, "so you don't have to worry about your poor old mother anymore." "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "Isn't it?" Silence. "Damon, can I ask you something?" I said quietly. "When was the last time you visited me because you wanted to see me? Not because you needed something, not because Brixton thought you should, just because you missed your mother." The silence stretched so long I wondered if he was still on the line. "Mom, that's not fair." You know I love you. Do you? I asked. Because lately it feels like you love what you think I can do for you, my house, my imaginary nest egg, my eventual inheritance. But me? I'm not convinced. You're being dramatic. Am I? I asked. Tell me something, Damon. What's my favorite color? What? He said, thrown. My favorite color, I repeated. If you love me, surely you know something that simple. More silence. Or my favorite food, I continued. What I like to do in my free time. The name of my best friend. Tell me anything about who I am that isn't tied to what you want from me. Mom, this, he began weakly. You can't, can you? I said softly. I heard him take a shaky breath. This conversation isn't going anywhere productive. No, I agreed. I suppose it isn't. After he hung up, I sat in the fading light, feeling 27 years of motherhood condense into one painful point. All the sacrifices, all the love, all the dreams I had for him. And here I was, with a son who saw me as a resource to manage and eventually liquidate, an asset on the family balance sheet. But he'd made one very important mistake. He assumed his modest mother had nothing more than a paid-off house and a little savings. He had no idea that the woman he dismissed so casually had spent 15 years quietly building an empire. Tomorrow, I would start showing him exactly how wrong he was. Tonight, I let myself grieve the son I thought I'd raised, the boy who would have stood between me and Brixton's cruelty instead of standing beside it, the son who would have valued his mother's dignity more than his wife's social status. Maybe that son never truly existed, or maybe he had once, and I simply hadn't noticed when he disappeared. Either way, it was time to stop grieving and start moving. I pulled a fresh legal pad from my desk and began writing. Properties to review, investments to restructure, wills to amend. If Damon wanted an inheritance, he would receive one, just not the kind he imagined. On Wednesday afternoon, a courier arrived with Margaret Sterling's report, bound in a thick manila folder. The weight of it alone told me it contained a story, a long one. I poured myself a cup of coffee, settled into my father's old chair, and opened it. I was not disappointed. Luxe Boutique wasn't just losing money, it was bleeding out at a pace that might have been impressive if it weren't so devastating. According to Margaret's report, Brixton had signed a 5-year lease at $4,000 a month, plus utilities and maintenance. Her initial inventory had cost $68,000, every penny of it borrowed. Monthly operating expenses, insurance, utilities, part-time staff added another $3,500. To even break even, she needed to pull in around $12,000 in sales each month. Her actual sales for the first quarter? $2,800. I did the math twice, convinced I must have misread something. I hadn't. At that rate, the boutique would be bankrupt within 6 months, but the numbers were only one part of the story. Margaret had also included copies of lease violations, complaints from other tenants, and, most interesting of all, a recording from the building's security system. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and watched myself walk into Brixton's boutique from the camera's vantage point. I heard all the conversations I hadn't caught that night. I watched the evening unfold from angles I never saw. The camera caught everything. Brixton's dismissive glance at my cardigan, her animated gossip with that cluster of women while I stood nearby, her cruel little speech about old paupers and depressing clothes. But what hit me hardest was Damon. The camera's view clearly showed him standing just behind a display rack, close enough to hear every word. I watched his face change, embarrassment, discomfort, and then resignation. He heard his wife insult his mother, and he did nothing. Worse than nothing, he actually drifted farther away, physically stepping back as if he could distance himself from any connection to me. I paused the video on his face and just stared. This was who he had become, a man who would let his wife publicly humiliate his mother rather than risk upsetting her. My phone rang, jolting me out of that cold, heavy stare. The caller ID showed my property manager. Jennifer, is something wrong? Mrs. Hayes, sorry to bother you, but we have a situation with the tenant at Luxe Boutique, she said. She's demanding to speak with the building owner about what she's calling harassment from other tenants. I almost laughed. Harassment, I repeated. Apparently, several businesses on her floor have complained about her noise levels and the way she speaks to customers. She says they're jealous of her success and wants the owner to step in. I see. And what did you tell her? That I would pass her concerns along, Jennifer said. But honestly, Mrs. Hayes, I think we need to consider whether this tenant is worth the trouble. The other businesses are already talking about not renewing their leases if nothing is done. The other businesses, the reliable, profitable tenants who paid on time and added value to my building, versus one failing boutique run by a woman who called elderly customers paupers. Jennifer, I said calmly, please schedule a meeting with Ms. Whitmore Hayes for Friday afternoon. Tell her the building owner will be represented by an agent. Of course. Would you like me to arrange for an attorney to be present? That won't be necessary, I replied. I'll handle this personally. After I hung up, I leaned back and thought through my options. I could end it quickly, serve eviction papers, terminate the lease, close the boutique, let Damon and Brixton hit the wall at full speed without ever knowing how close help had been. That would have been the merciful route, and mercy was a luxury I no longer felt compelled to offer. Instead, I wanted to observe. I wanted to see how they behaved when the pressure really mounted. What happened to their marriage when money ran dry? How long it would take for them to turn on each other when their pretty life began to crack. I wanted to see who they truly were when there was nothing left to hide behind. Thursday night, I did something I hadn't done since Damon's wedding. I called my sister Patricia in Florida. "Marianne, what a surprise. How are you, honey?" she said, her voice warm through the line. Patricia is 3 years younger than me, a widow like I am. After her husband died, she moved to Tampa. She's the only person who knows even half of what I really own. "I'm all right," I said, "but I need some advice." "About what?" So I told her everything. The grand opening, Brixton's cruelty, Damon suggesting I sell my home to prop up their failing boutique. Then the worst part, the realization they'd been counting on my death to fix their financial mess. Patricia listened quietly, only interjecting now and then with a soft, or, "Oh, honey." "So," she said finally, "what are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to lay everything out, show them exactly what they've thrown away. Another part of me wants to step back and let them destroy themselves. "Can I tell you what I think?" she asked. "Please." "I think you're still waiting for Damon to wake up," she said gently. "You're hoping he'll finally stand up for you, that he'll pick you over that awful woman." I went quiet, because she was right. "But honey," Patricia continued, her voice soft but firm, "he's already chosen, more than once. You can't keep handing him chances to hurt you." "So what would you do?" I asked. "I'd protect myself," she said simply. "You've spent 36 years putting that boy first, sacrificing for him, loving him without conditions. When has he ever done the same for you?" The question hung between us like a verdict. "Never," I whispered. "That's right. Never," Patricia said softly. "So stop waiting for him to become the son you deserved and start being the mother you need to be, to yourself." Friday afternoon arrived cold and bright. I dressed carefully for my meeting with Brixton, choosing a simple navy suit and my pearl necklace, the uniform of a professional woman, not a helpless elderly widow. I wanted to walk into that room as what I truly was, not what they assumed me to be. The conference room at Morrison Property Management was sleek and impersonal. Glass table, chrome chairs, walls too white to be welcoming. Jennifer had scheduled the meeting for 2 p.m., giving me time to reread the building policies and Brixton's lease one more time. Brixton swept in 10 minutes late, wrapped in what was clearly her most expensive ensemble, a cream designer suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her hair was flawless, her makeup immaculate, but the tightness around her eyes gave her away. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she said breathlessly as she dropped into the chair across from Jennifer's desk. Traffic was absolutely terrible. Jennifer murmured polite things while I sat quietly in the corner, introduced only as Mrs. Hayes, a representative of the building's ownership group. Brixton barely glanced at me. One quick, dismissive flick of her eyes. I might as well have been part of the furniture. "I'm so grateful you could arrange this meeting," she began, shifting into that sugary tone I knew too well, her manipulation voice. "I've been having some concerns about the other tenants in the building." "What kind of concerns?" Jennifer asked professionally. "Well, they've been spreading rumors about my business. Completely false rumors," Brixton said, lifting her chin. "I think some of them are intimidated by my success." I almost choked on my coffee. Success. The woman was 3 months behind on nearly everything and losing money faster than she could spend it, but in her mind she was a threat others envied. "What kind of rumors?" Jennifer pressed. "Oh, you know how people talk," Brixton said with a dismissive wave. "Things about how I treat customers, complaints about noise. It's all nonsense, very unprofessional, and it's affecting my ability to run my business." "I see," Jennifer said. "And you'd like the building ownership to intervene?" "Exactly," Brixton replied. "I think the other tenants need to be reminded we're supposed to support each other, not tear each other down." Jennifer glanced my way. I gave the slightest nod. "Ms. Whitmore-Hayes," Jennifer said, "I have to ask, have there been any incidents with customers that might have caused these concerns?" Brixton's smile tightened just a fraction. "Nothing significant," she replied. "You know how it is in retail. Sometimes you have to deal with difficult people who don't understand your target market." "Difficult people?" Jennifer repeated. "Well, yes," Brixton said. "People who just come in to look around, touch everything, ask endless questions when they clearly have no intention of buying. It's not good for business to have that kind of customer hanging around." My hands curled into fists in my lap. She was talking about me. Again. And still didn't know it. "I see," Jennifer said carefully. "And how do you typically handle these difficult customers?" "I'm always polite, of course," Brixton replied, her tone a touch too sharp to be convincing. "But sometimes you have to be firm. Make it clear that certain people might be more comfortable shopping elsewhere." Jennifer glanced down at the folder in front of her. "Several witnesses have reported hearing you refer to a customer as an old pauper at your opening event," she said. Brixton's face drained of color and then flooded with red. "I would never say something like that," she stammered. "Who said that?" "Multiple witnesses," Jennifer replied evenly, "including other business owners in the building." "They're lying," Brixton snapped, her mask beginning to crack. "I don't know why they would make something like that up, but it never happened." I cleared my throat softly. "Actually, Ms. Whitmore-Hayes," I said, "it did happen." She turned toward me for the first time, really looked at me. I watched confusion flicker into recognition as the pieces clicked together in her mind. "I was there," I continued, my voice calm. "I heard every word you said about the elderly woman in the faded cardigan, how she should be ashamed of her depressing clothes, how she didn't belong at an event like that." Brixton's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. "You," she whispered, "I'm the old pauper you were talking about," I said pleasantly, "though I prefer Mrs. Hayes." The silence in the room was heavy. Jennifer looked from Brixton to me, starting to understand exactly what she'd walked into. I don't understand," Brixton stammered. "What are you doing here?" "I represent the building's ownership group," I said, which was technically true. "We take our tenants' behavior very seriously, especially when it affects our reputation and the comfort of other businesses." Brixton looked like she might faint. This has to be some kind of setup," she said, voice shaking. "Not a setup," I replied gently. "Just business." I leaned forward slightly. "You see, when you mock customers in our building, it reflects poorly on all of us. Other tenants have complained. They're worried about the kind of clientele your behavior might drive away." "You can't do this," Brixton said, panic finally breaking the polished veneer. "I have a lease. I have rights." Jennifer opened the folder again. "Actually," she said, "your lease includes a clause about maintaining the building's professional reputation. Behavior that damages that reputation can be grounds for termination. But Brixton's voice cracked. You don't understand. We've put everything into this business. Everything. I'm sure you have, I said softly. Unfortunately, that doesn't excuse treating customers with disrespect. Brixton shot up from her chair, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. I need to call my husband. This isn't over, she said, voice trembling between anger and fear. Of course not, I replied. You have 30 days to correct the situation. If we receive no further complaints, you may continue your tenancy. Her eyes narrowed. 30 days? 30 days, I repeated, to prove that you can treat every customer with respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived income. Surely that's not too much to ask. She stared at me with something very close to hatred. Then she snatched her purse, turned sharply, and stormed out, her heels hammering the marble like a tantrum. Jennifer and I sat in silence for a moment after the door closed. Well, she said at last, a hint of dry amusement in her voice. That was interesting. Indeed, I replied, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely, perfectly in control. May I ask how you know her? Jennifer said. I smiled as I gathered my things. She's my daughter-in-law. Jennifer's eyebrows shot up. Oh my. Oh my indeed, I replied. Jennifer, please make sure the security recordings from that night are properly preserved. I have a feeling we may need them. As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The look on Brixton's face when she realized who I really was, that alone would keep me warm for weeks. But this was only the beginning. Now she would go home to Damon in a panic. She would paint herself as the victim, tell him I was trying to destroy her, and he would be forced to choose. Defend his wife or defend his mother? I already suspected which way he would lean, but I was curious to watch him prove me right. The calls began at 6:30 that evening. Barely an hour after our meeting, I let the phone ring, then ring again. By the fourth call, I finally answered. Hello, Damon. What the hell did you do? His voice was ragged with fear and anger. Brixton came home in tears. She says you're trying to ruin her business. She says you're working with building management to get her evicted. I'm not trying to do anything, I said calmly. I attended a standard meeting about tenant behavior. Don't play games with me, Mom, he snapped. How are you involved with that building? And don't tell me it's a coincidence that you just happened to be at a meeting about Brixton's lease. I sat down slowly, pressing the phone to my ear. This was it. The moment everything I'd carefully kept hidden would start to surface. You're right, I said. It's not a coincidence. Silence. Then, more quietly, what does that mean? It means I have a business interest in that building, Damon. It means when your wife publicly humiliated a customer, me, she was doing it on property I partially control. That's impossible, he said immediately. You don't have that kind of money. Don't I? The pause that followed was long and heavy. I could practically hear him struggling to reconcile the poor old mother in his head with the reality I was hinting at. Mom, what are you talking about? He demanded. You live in a tiny house. You shop at discount stores. You drive a 15-year-old car. Because I choose to, I interrupted, not because I have to. You're lying, he shot back. The words hit like a slap. Excuse me? I said quietly. You're lying to scare us, he insisted. You're pretending to have money you don't have because you're mad about something stupid Brixton said. I felt something hard and final settle inside my chest. Even now, faced with information that contradicted his assumptions, he couldn't entertain the possibility that he'd misjudged me. I see, I said. So in your mind, it's more believable that I'd lie about having money than that you never bothered to learn the truth about my life. Mom! Tell me something, Damon, I cut in. When was the last time you asked how I was doing financially? When did you wonder how I kept the house after your father died? How I paid for his funeral? How I've maintained this place for 15 years on Social Security alone? You assumed I was struggling. I finished for him. Because that was convenient. It made it easier to visit twice a year and call once a month. If Mom's barely getting by, then she doesn't need much attention, isn't that right? That's not fair, he said weakly. Isn't it? I asked. You've been planning on inheriting my house, haven't you? Counting on it to bail you out? The silence that followed was so profound, I wondered if the line had gone dead. How did you know about that? He whispered. Because I am not the naive old woman you take me for, I replied. I know you tried to get a loan using your inheritance as collateral. I know you're drowning in debt. I know you and Brixton have been quietly waiting for my death to fix your financial mess. Jesus, Mom, that's not… We never… What? I said sharply. You never wanted me to die? Just my money? I heard him drag in a shaky breath. You're twisting everything, he said. Am I? I asked. Then explain how I'm wrong. Explain how asking me to sell my home to fund your wife's business isn't exactly what it looks like. I thought, you'd want to help. That's what family does. Family, I repeated. When Brixton called me an old pauper in front of a room full of strangers, was that what family does? When you stood there and listened to her mock me and said nothing, is that what family does? You don't understand the pressure we're under, he said. No, I said firmly. You don't understand the pressure I've lived under. I took a breath. 41 years married to a man who left me with the bills and a sick baby every time his job called. 15 years of widowhood, teaching myself how to manage money while everyone assumed I was helpless and broke. 3 years watching my own son grow distant and disrespectful while his wife quietly removed me from his life. Mom, please. I'm tired, Damon, I said. Tired of being dismissed, ignored, and taken for granted. Tired of being treated like a burden to manage instead of someone to love. But we do love you, he insisted. No, I said, my voice steady. You love what you think you can get from me? There's a difference. Behind him, I could hear raised voices, Brixton's sharp tone clashing with Damon's. They were already arguing. Mom, I have to go, he said. Brixton is really upset. Of course she is, I replied. Her meal ticket just disappeared. That's cruel. Is it? I asked. Or is it just the truth? He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my quiet kitchen, surrounded by the artifacts of nearly 4 decades of my life there, the dented tea kettle I'd bought as a newlywed, the scarred kitchen table where I'd checked his homework, the window where I had watched him walk to school with a backpack too big for his small frame. Suddenly, it all felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit, a display of a life I'd already outgrown. The next morning brought a surprise I hadn't planned for. I was in the garden deadheading roses when a black BMW turned into my driveway. Brixton stepped out of the black BMW wearing dark sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. Her immaculate designer image was slipping now. Her dress was wrinkled, her posture stiff, like someone trying very hard to look composed while everything around her crumbled. "Marianne," she said, stopping at the edge of my flower bed, "we need to talk." I kept pruning my roses, not looking up. "Do we?" "This has gone far enough," she said. "You've made your point." "Have I?" I asked mildly. "And what point is that?" She shifted, the facade starting to crack. "That you're angry about what I said at the boutique. I get it. I was stressed. I said something thoughtless." "And you want an apology?" I straightened, meeting her eyes over the roses. "Is that what you think this is about? An apology?" "I'm here, aren't I?" she said defensively. "I'm sorry I called you—" "What?" I asked. "You called me what?" She swallowed. "It was wrong. And I apologize." "Mm-hmm." I studied her. "And what else?" "What do you mean, what else?" "You're here because you want something, Brixton," I said calmly. "You always want something when you pretend to be nice to me. So what is it this time?" Her mask slipped further, desperation finally showing. "I want you to back off," she said. "Stop whatever game you're playing with building management. Let us run our business in peace." "Our business?" I asked. "I thought it was your business." "You know what I mean," she snapped. I set down my pruning shears and faced her fully. Actually, I don't think I do, I said. From where I stand, it looks like you opened a business you couldn't afford, in a building you couldn't afford, selling merchandise to customers you don't respect. That's not. And when that business started failing, as anyone with a basic calculator could have predicted, you decided the solution was to convince my son that his mother should sell her home to bail you out. We never asked you to. Didn't you? I cut in. Then what exactly was Tuesday night's phone call about? Damon suggesting I sell my house and move to a senior community so you two could have a family investment? Brixton went pale. He told you that? He did, I said. Apparently, he thought I'd be thrilled to give up the home I've lived in for 32 years, so you wouldn't have to face the consequences of your own choices. We're desperate, she burst out suddenly, the words tumbling over each other. Her composure cracked clean through. We've lost everything, okay? The house is in foreclosure, the credit cards are maxed out. If the boutique fails, we'll have nothing left. And whose fault is that? I asked quietly. It's not about fault. Isn't it? I said. You're the one who borrowed $68,000 for inventory. You're the one who signed a lease you couldn't afford. You're the one who insulted customers in front of potential investors. For the first time since I'd known her, Brixton looked genuinely shocked. How do you know all that? She asked. I smiled slightly. Because I'm not the foolish old woman you think I am. But you can't know about the inventory or the lease terms unless... She broke off, her eyes widening. Oh my God, you really are involved with the building. Among other things, I said. What other things? She demanded. I turned back to my roses, letting the silence do some of the work. Tell me, Brixton, I said at last. What do you know about my late husband's life insurance policy? What? Robert died 15 years ago, I continued. Did you ever wonder how I managed to keep this house? How I paid his medical bills, his funeral, the property taxes all these years? You assumed I was barely hanging on, I finished. You assumed I was one emergency away from losing everything. You built your entire relationship with me on that assumption. Marianne, I don't understand what you're getting at. I faced her again, letting her see I was done playing the role she'd assigned me. Robert's life insurance policy was worth $300,000, I said. Did you know that? She shook her head, speechless. I invested every penny, I went on. Very carefully at first, very conservatively. Then, as I learned more aggressively. Do you know what $300,000 becomes after 15 years of compound growth? She said nothing. Enough to buy the building your boutique is in, I said. More than enough to fund a dozen businesses like yours without blinking. Brixton staggered back a step, as if I'd physically shoved her. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? I asked. Would you like to see my portfolio statements, my bank records, my property holdings? That's impossible, she said. You live like someone who learned not to waste money on appearances, I finished. Like someone who understands that real security comes from planning and discipline, not designer labels and overpriced storefronts. Brixton sank down onto my porch steps, her designer dress bunching under her like any other fabric. Her sunglasses were off now, her mascara starting to smudge. You let us think you were poor, she whispered. I let you think whatever you wanted to think, I corrected. There's a difference. But why? She asked. Why would you hide it? I considered that. She deserved at least the truth. Because I wanted to see who my son really was, I said. Whether he'd love me or for what he thought he could get from me. Whether the woman he married would treat me with respect no matter what she believed I could offer her. And now you know, she said quietly. Yes, I answered. Now I know. Tears spilled down her cheeks, dragging black lines through her carefully constructed face. So what happens now? She asked. Are you going to destroy us? Evict us? Make sure we lose everything? I don't need to destroy you, I said gently. You've done a thorough job of that yourselves. Please, she whispered. I know I've been awful. I know I've treated you terribly, but please don't take it out on Damon. He loves you. Does he? I asked. Or does he love what he thought he would inherit from me? She had no answer. Brixton, can I give you some advice? I asked. She nodded weakly. Stop blaming other people for your choices, I said. Stop expecting others to fix the messes you make, and stop treating people badly just because you assume they're powerless. You never really know who's watching or what they're capable of. I picked up my gardening tools and walked toward the house, leaving her sitting on my porch steps like a child who'd finally been told the truth. At the door, I turned back. Oh, and Brixton, I added, you have 27 days left on that 30-day notice. I'd suggest you use them wisely. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down at my desk to update my will. It was time for some changes. 2 weeks went by in a strange, peaceful quiet. No calls from Damon, no visits from Brixton, no apologies, no explanations, no desperate pleas, just silence. And that silence told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in their lives. If they had truly loved me, they would have fought for our relationship. They would have apologized, begged for forgiveness, tried to mend what they'd broken. Instead, they were regrouping, strategizing, looking for a new angle to exploit. So when Margaret Sterling called on Thursday morning, I wasn't surprised, only mildly curious about what form the next betrayal would take. "Marianne, I thought you should know," she began. "Your son filed a petition yesterday claiming you're mentally incompetent and requesting guardianship over your affairs." I set my coffee cup down very carefully. "I see. They're claiming you've been making irrational financial decisions and that your judgment is compromised," Margaret continued. "They want control of your assets to protect you from yourself." The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. When manipulation didn't work, when emotional pressure didn't work, they simply decided to try taking everything through the courts. "What evidence are they presenting?" I asked. "It's all circumstantial," she said. "Allegations that you've been paranoid, making accusations against family members, isolating yourself from loved ones. They're painting you as an elderly woman in decline." I laughed, an actual startled laugh. "How fascinating," I said. "And when is the hearing?" "Next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Marianne, you need to take this seriously. These petitions can be very persuasive to judges, especially when they involve older people and concerned family members." "Oh, I'm taking it very seriously," I replied. "In fact, I think it's time to end this charade once and for all." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I called my financial advisor at Goldman Sachs. "Mrs. Hayes, what a pleasure to hear from you," Jonathan said. "How can we help today?" "Jonathan, I need a complete portfolio summary," I told him. "Every account, every investment, every property holding. I want it detailed, notarized, and formatted for court presentation." "Court?" he echoed. "Is there a problem?" "You could say that," I replied. "My family is trying to have me declared incompetent so they can seize control of my assets." "Good Lord," he said. "Do they have any idea what your financial position actually is?" "None," I said, "and I think it's time they found out." "I'll have everything ready by Monday morning," he said. "If you don't mind my saying, Mrs. Hayes, this is going to be quite a shock for them." "Jonathan," I said, "that's exactly what I'm counting on." Saturday brought another twist. Patricia called from Florida, her voice tight with anger wrapped in concern. "Marianne, I just got the strangest phone call from your son." "Did you now?" I said. "What did he want?" "He was asking if I'd noticed any changes in you," she said. "Whether you seemed forgetful or paranoid, if you'd said odd things lately. He told me he was worried about your mental state." I closed my eyes. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him he was out of his mind," she said briskly. "I told him you're the sharpest 71-year-old woman I know, and if he's worried about you, maybe he should try talking to you instead of interrogating your relatives." "Good girl," I murmured. "But Marianne," she continued, "what's really going on? He mentioned you making wild claims about money, accusing his wife of things." "Patricia," I said, "what would you say if I told you my investment portfolio is worth over $3 million? There was a beat of silence. Then, "I'd say that explains why you've never seemed the least bit worried about retirement." You wouldn't think I was delusional? I asked. Honey, she said, you've been making smart financial decisions since you were 25. If anyone could turn Bob's insurance payout into millions, it's you. And that was why Patricia was the only person I considered real family. She knew who I was. She believed in me without needing documents and signatures to prove it. So, what are you going to do about Tuesday? She asked. I'm going to give them exactly what they're asking for, I said. The truth. Tuesday morning dawned crisp and bright. I dressed with particular care, a navy blue suit I had bought but never worn, my mother's pearls resting at my throat, and polished shoes that whispered wealth instead of screaming for attention. I arrived at the courthouse early and spotted Damon and Brixton near the entrance, hunched together with their attorney. Damon looked awful, drawn and pale, his expensive suit hanging on him like it belonged to someone larger or younger or less tired. Brixton was perfectly styled as always, but the tightness around her mouth and the shadows under her eyes betrayed her. They saw me approaching, and their attorney stepped forward, clearly expecting a frightened old woman desperate to negotiate. Mrs. Hayes, I'm David Morrison, he said. I'm representing your son. I was hoping we might speak privately before the hearing. I'm afraid I don't see the point, Mr. Morrison, I said pleasantly. We'll have the chance to speak very openly in just a few minutes. Mrs. Hayes, he began soothingly, I want you to understand, no one is questioning your value as a person. This is simply about ensuring your financial security as you age. Mr. Morrison, I interrupted gently, has anyone explained to you exactly what financial security you're here to protect? He frowned. I'm sorry? My son petitioned the court claiming I'm making irrational financial decisions, I said. I assume you reviewed my finances to determine what assets supposedly need protecting? Well, we know about your house, of course, he said. Your Social Security, your late husband's pension. I see, I said, and those are the only assets you're aware of. He hesitated. Are there others? Instead of answering, I handed him a thick folder. Perhaps you should take a look at this before we go inside, I said. David Morrison opened the folder. The blood drained from his face. Behind him, I heard Damon's shaky voice. What is it? What's in there? The attorney flipped through page after page, his eyes widening with each one. Finally, he looked up at me, his expression somewhere between stunned and reverent. Mrs. Hayes, he said, this shows assets totaling over $3.7 million. $3.7 million? Damon repeated faintly, like the air had just been punched out of his lungs. If they had truly loved me, they would have fought for our relationship. They would have called, apologized, begged for another chance, tried to mend what they'd broken. Instead, they went quiet, not to reflect, but to regroup, to plan, to look for a new way to get what they wanted. So when Margaret Sterling called that Thursday morning, I wasn't surprised, only slightly curious about the form their next move would take. Marianne, I thought you should know, she said. Your son filed a petition yesterday claiming you're mentally incompetent and requesting guardianship over your affairs. I set my coffee cup down very carefully. I see. They're alleging you've been making irrational financial decisions and that your judgment is impaired, Margaret continued. They want control over your assets to protect you from yourself. The audacity of it took my breath away for a moment. When guilt didn't work, when pleading didn't work, when manipulation failed, they went straight to trying to legally take everything. What evidence are they offering? I asked. It's mostly circumstantial, she said. They're claiming you've become paranoid, that you're making wild accusations against family members, isolating yourself. They're painting a picture of a confused, declining, elderly woman. I laughed, an unexpected, sharp sound. How fascinating, I said. And when is the hearing? Next Tuesday, 10 a.m. Marianne, you need to take this seriously. Judges can be very sympathetic to concerned relatives in these situations, especially when age is involved. Oh, I am taking it seriously, I replied. In fact, I think it's time to put an end to this entire performance. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I called my financial advisor at Goldman Sachs. Mrs. Hayes, what a pleasure to hear from you. Jonathan said. "How can we help today?" "Jonathan, I need a full portfolio summary," I told him. "Every account, every investment, every property, itemized, notarized, and formatted for court." "Court?" he repeated. "Is something wrong?" "You could say that. My family is trying to have me declared incompetent so they can gain legal control of my assets." "Good Lord," he said. "Do they have any idea what your financial situation actually is?" "None at all," I said. "And I think it's time they found out." "I'll have the documents ready by Monday morning," he said. "If I may, Mrs. Hayes, this is going to be quite a shock for them." "Jonathan," I replied, "that's exactly what I'm hoping for." On Saturday, Patricia called from Florida, her voice tight with anger and worry. "Marianne, I just got the strangest phone call from your son," she said. "Did you?" I asked. "What did he want?" "He was asking whether you'd seemed confused lately." "Forgetful." "Paranoid," she said. "He said he was concerned about your mental health." I closed my eyes. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him he was the crazy one," she said briskly. "I told him you're the sharpest 71-year-old woman I know, and if he's so worried about you, he ought to talk to you himself instead of interrogating your sister." "Good," I said softly. "Very good." "But Marianne, what's really going on?" she asked. "He mentioned you claiming to have money, accusing his wife of things." "Patricia," I said, "what would you say if I told you my investment portfolio is worth more than $3 million? There was a beat of silence. Then, "I'd say that explains why you never seemed worried about retirement." "You wouldn't think I was delusional?" I asked. "Honey," she said, "you've been making smart financial decisions since you were 25. If anyone could turn Bob's insurance payout into millions, it's you." That was why Patricia was my real family. She knew my mind. She trusted my competence. She didn't need proof to believe in me. "So what are you going to do on Tuesday?" she asked. "I'm going to give them exactly what they asked for," I said. "The truth." Tuesday morning was clear and crisp. I dressed with intention, a navy suit I had bought and never worn, my mother's pearls, and polished shoes that spoke of quiet money instead of flashy wealth. At the courthouse entrance, I saw Damon and Brixton clustered with their lawyer. Damon looked worn out and thinner than before, his expensive suit hanging on him. Brixton was as polished as ever, but the strain showed around her eyes and mouth. They noticed me approaching, and their attorney stepped forward, clearly expecting a frightened old woman looking to negotiate. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm David Morrison," he said. "I represent your son. I was hoping we might speak privately before the hearing." "I don't see the need, Mr. Morrison," I said pleasantly. "We'll all be speaking quite openly very soon." "Mrs. Hayes," he began carefully, "no one is questioning your value as a person. This is only about ensuring your financial security as you—" "Mr. Morrison," I interrupted gently, "has anyone explained to you exactly what financial assets you're trying to protect?" He frowned. "I'm not sure I follow." "My son filed a petition claiming I'm mismanaging my money," I said. "I assume you've reviewed my financial situation to see what's at stake." "Well, we know about your house," he said, "your Social Security, your husband's pension." "I see," I replied. "And those are the only assets you're aware of?" He hesitated. "Are there others?" Instead of answering, I handed him a thick folder. "Perhaps you should take a look before we go in," I said. He opened it. The color drained from his face. Behind him, I heard Damon ask, "What is it? What's in there?" David flipped through the pages, his expression changing from confusion to disbelief to stunned respect. "Mrs. Hayes," he said slowly, "this shows assets totaling over $3.7 million. $3.7 million? Damon echoed weakly, like the words didn't quite fit in his mouth. "That can't be right," he added. "Real estate holdings valued at $1.2 million, Morrison read. Investment portfolio totaling $2.3 million. Liquid assets of $200,000. He looked up at me. "Mrs. Hayes, why didn't you mention this when your son first raised concerns about your finances?" "He never asked," I said simply. "He just assumed I was incompetent because I'm old and live modestly." Brixton stepped forward, her face flushed. This has to be fake. She made up those documents to get out of the guardianship. I smiled and handed her another folder. Those are notarized statements from Goldman Sachs, my property management firm, and my bank, I said. You're welcome to verify every number. The courtroom was nearly empty when our case was called. Judge Harrison, a stern woman in her 60s with no patience for nonsense, looked over the file. Mr. Morrison, she said, you've petitioned this court to appoint a guardian for Mrs. Mary Ann Hayes on the grounds of mental incompetence. Present your evidence. David Morrison stood, visibly shaken by what he'd just seen. Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess to review newly presented. Denied, the judge said. You may present your case or withdraw your petition. He glanced helplessly at Damon, who was staring at me like he didn't recognize his own mother. Your Honor, Morrison said quietly, we withdraw the petition. On what basis? Judge Harrison asked. On the basis that the petitioner was misinformed about the respondent's financial status and mental capacity, he said. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Hayes, would you like to say anything regarding this matter? I stood. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to address my son's concerns about my mental health. Go ahead, she said. My son decided I must be incompetent, I said, because I discovered his wife had publicly humiliated me, calling me an old pauper at her boutique's grand opening. When I took appropriate steps to address her behavior, he concluded I must be paranoid or delusional. What kind of steps? Judge Harrison asked. I'm part of the investment group that owns the building where her business is located, I explained. When other tenants complained about her behavior, I attended a meeting to address it. The judge looked down at the financial documents in front of her. These records show substantial assets, she said. Were you hiding them from your family? I wasn't hiding anything, I replied. I was choosing to live according to my values instead of broadcasting my means. My son assumed I was poor because I don't flaunt wealth. And why did you choose not to? She asked. I looked straight at Damon. Because I wanted to know whether my family loved me for who I am, I said, or for what they thought they could get from me. The judge followed my gaze. And what did you discover? She asked. That they loved what they thought they could inherit, I said. When they realized I was financially secure, they didn't take pride in my success. They tried to take control of it. Judge Harrison was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to Damon. Mr. Hayes, is your mother's statement accurate? Damon stood slowly. Your Honor, we just thought she needed help. Did you ask her if she needed help? The judge asked. Not directly, he admitted. Did you ask her anything about her financial situation? No, Your Honor. Did you attempt to have a meaningful conversation with her about your concerns before filing this petition? His silence said enough. Judge Harrison shook her head. This petition is denied. Mrs. Hayes appears fully capable of managing her own affairs and has clearly done so successfully for many years without interference. She fixed Damon with a hard stare. Mr. Hayes, trying to obtain guardianship over the assets of a competent adult is a serious matter. If your mother chose to pursue charges of attempted financial exploitation, she would likely have grounds. Your Honor, I said, stepping in, I don't wish to press charges. I only want my family to understand that I am entirely capable of making my own decisions about my life and my money. And what decisions have you made? She asked. I took a breath. This was the moment. I've decided to revise my will, I said. My son and his wife will inherit nothing from me. My estate will go to organizations that support elderly people who are genuinely in need and to individuals who have shown me real kindness over the years. The courtroom was silent. I heard Brixton's sharp inhale, saw Damon's face crumple. Mrs. Hayes, the judge said, more gently now, that is entirely your right. Thank you, Your Honor, I replied. I just wanted my son to understand that actions have consequences. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse alone. Near their car, Damon and Brixton were locked in a fierce argument. I could almost see the exact moment when the foundation of their marriage began to crack under the weight of their lost expectations. I didn't feel sorry for them. My phone rang as I reached my car. "Patricia?" "Well?" she asked. "How did it go?" "It went perfectly," I said. "I'm finally free." "Free from what, honey?" she asked softly. "From pretending not to see who they really are," I said. "From hoping they'll change, from feeling guilty for protecting myself from people who never protected me." I drove home through streets that somehow looked brighter than they had in years. The landmarks of my life were still there, but they no longer felt like reminders of pain, just markers of a life I had survived and, in many ways, won. My house sat at the end of Maple Street exactly as it had for 32 years, but now it felt less like a hiding place and more like a sanctuary. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and called my attorney. There were changes to finalize, charities to contact, and a new chapter to begin. At 71 years old, I had finally learned the most important lesson of my life. You don't owe anyone your suffering just because you share DNA. Outside the kitchen window, the roses I'd been trimming the morning Brixton came to plead with me were in full bloom. They had needed attention, care, and the courage to cut away what was diseased and dead. My life wasn't so different. 3 months later, a card arrived in the mail. It was from Eleanor Hartwell, the woman my age I'd met at the boutique opening, the one who had felt, like me, out of place in all that shallow glitter. "Dear Marianne," she'd written, "I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I got your address from the church directory. I just wanted to thank you for that lovely conversation at the boutique. You were the only genuine person I met that night. I was wondering if you might like to have tea with me sometime." I smiled and reached for my phone. It was time to make new friends, real ones this time. The old Marianne had spent decades believing family was everything, that blood was sacred, that love meant endless sacrifice and limitless forgiveness. The new Marianne understood something different. Family isn't about genetics. It's about respect, kindness, and genuine care. And sometimes the family you choose is worth far more than the one you were born into. I had finally chosen well, and finally, mercifully, I was free. Now I'm curious about you, listening to my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever lived through something similar? Share it in the comments. I read as many as I can. And on the final screen, I'm leaving 2 more of this channel's favorite stories. They'll shock you and maybe help you see your own life a little differently. Thank you for staying with me until the end.